Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ethan Marcus. I am the managing director of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, the national umbrella organization of the Ladino-speaking Sephardic community in the US. We're so excited to have you here for our wonderful new three-part series, for our part two of the series on the history of Moroccan Jewry and its early diasporas. Just as a reminder, this program is through our wonderful Sephardic Digital Academy, an online learning center that you can learn about almost everything Sephardic, whether it be Sephardic history, culture, Ladino language, Sephardic cooking, Torah perspectives, and more. If you're interested in seeing other programs we have on the Digital Academy, please visit our website at sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. If you've also missed any parts of this series in the past or any other series, you can always go to our YouTube channel where we post everything. You can go youtube.com/Sephardic Brotherhood as well. We're very glad to have Dolev here today with us for part two. Dolev Rivo is a current student of medicine and computer science in Israel. In addition to his studies, he has a strong interest in genealogy, Jewish history, and population genetics. His work focused particularly on the history and genealogy and genetics of Moroccan Jewry. Without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Dolev whenever you're ready. You're muted. You just have to unmute.
Hi, thank you, and hi everybody. Today I'm going to talk about the history of Moroccan Jewry, which is maybe the less known side of the Sephardic world. Okay. So today my lecture will be divided to three parts: early history, the mass migration of Jews from Iberia after the expulsion and the legacy of Sephardim in Morocco, and the early Moroccan Jewish diasporas. So what interested me the most starting to dig into Moroccan Jewish history is what can we say about history of Jews in Morocco? Like, when did the first Jews come to Morocco? There are many legends. The Jews came to Morocco at the time of King Solomon, that they mass converted Berber tribes, but those are just legends that originated in medieval times. The earliest factual evidence we have for Jews in Morocco, they all come from the 3rd and 4th centuries, from a Roman town called Volubilis. Here you can see in this map the territories in the Roman Empire. Only northern Morocco was part of the Roman Empire. And in a city called Volubilis, here you can see the Roman ruins, we find evidence of Jews. Now, who are those Jews? What language did they speak? So from what we know, from the evidence we have, they were speaking Greek and Latin. And you can see all sorts of scriptures found there. This one in Hebrew says Matrona bat Rabbi Yehuda Nach, which means Matrona, the daughter of Rabbi Yehuda. And in this one in Greek, it says Protopolites kai Klianos, the head of the Jewish congregation. So those were Greek and Latin speaking Jews that had Greek names and Latin names. And it makes sense because it was part of the Latin and Roman world. The interesting question is whether those Jews are the ancestors of the Moroccan Jews we see later or not, because we know Jews were present in some parts at some times, and then they disappeared, and then new community appeared that has nothing to do with the original community. So I think it's one of those cases because we have no information about Jews in Morocco from this point onwards until the 9th century. So for 500 years, no information about Jews in Morocco. So I don't think this community has had continuity, but it's interesting. During that period of time, we had the Islamic conquest. As we know, the Arabic and Islamic world had expanded in series of conquests from the Arabian Peninsula all the way in the west to Morocco, to Spain, to southern France. And that situation put all Jewish communities in the region, in Spain, in Morocco, in Algeria, they were all speaking Arabic. That became the language of all Jews in those communities, and they were living under Islamic rule. The communities we find in the early medieval, when I said 9th century, so these are the communities we find. This is a map of the region. And the two very important communities that rose in that period is the one of Fez and the one of Sijil Massa. Sijil Massa is located in the northern tip of the Sahara Desert, so southern Morocco. And it was a very important center for trade, for trans-Saharan trade, which is why I believe Jews arrived this place. And Fez was a city that was established in the late 8th century, but Jews started settling in the 9th and 10th century. And we ask ourselves, okay, if this community is not related to the original community that was there 500 years ago, where did Jews come from to those places? And the answer is we don't really know. But we have some clues. And for example, for Fez, it said it's been like if you go to medieval scriptures, it says that both Jews and Muslims came to Fez from Cordova, from Spain, but also from Kairouan, which was an older Jewish community that existed in what's modern day Tunisia. So those are some clues we have for where Jews came from. And very quickly, Morocco became a very important center of Jewish scholarship during medieval period. We know of some of the greatest medieval Jewish scholars lived in Morocco for at least a period of time. For example, Rabbi Yitzhak Al-Fassi, the Rif, his name Al-Fassi because he spent most of his life in Fez, and at old age he moved to Spain, to southern Spain, to Lucena, and he had a very important yeshiva there, and some of the most important Spanish Jewish scholars at the time studied under his instructions, names like Rabbi Yosef ibn Migash, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Rabbi Baruch ibn Al-Belia. All of those people studied under Rabbi Yitzhak Al-Fassi. We also know similar stories of Rabbi Dunash ben Labrat, who was a very important poet and grammarian in this period. He also, at old age, he moved to Cordova. Maimonides, who was born in Cordova, opposite direction, at some point his family moved to Fez, and he lived in a very difficult time. In this time, there was very strong religious intolerance from the Muslim side. A radical Islamic dynasty called the Almohad dynasty ruled over southern Spain and North Africa, and it put Jews in a situation that convert or die. That was the situation Jews had to face. And he wrote, and we know some Jews in Morocco chose death, and he was not happy with this decision. And he said, don't die, don't choose to die, convert to Islam, live as crypto-Jews, and return to Judaism when you can. And many Jews in Morocco, in fact, all Moroccan Jewry converted to Islam for 150 years until they were able to return to Judaism. And another very important person, Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra, he also lived in that time period, and he also spent some time in Morocco. He was very close with the Dayan of Sijil Masa, and he wrote a very long poem mourning over the loss of Jewish communities in the region. And this entire, you can see here in Hebrew, this entire poem mourns over the destruction of important centers in Morocco, Sijil Masa, Marrakesh, Fez, Tlemcen. Tlemcen is in Algeria, but it's close to Morocco, which shows that many scholars from Spain saw Morocco as a very important place of scholarship, and they were very related to one, and the communities were very related to one another and in constant touch and constant flow of people and ideas. And in fact, at the late medieval period, Jews started using surnames. Now, surnames are exciting to me because they allow us to trace movements. And we have some examples of Jews in the 13th and 14th century Spain that bear surnames that reveal their origins from Morocco, but we also have the opposite trend of people in Morocco before the expulsion having surnames that reveal their origins in Spain. For example, I'll just take the name Gian that appears here the last. We know that the second chief rabbi of Marrakesh around the year 1300, his surname was Gian, and Gian means someone from the city of Jayan, which is now, the Arabic name is Jayan, and the Spanish name is now Jaén in southern Spain. So we know those people. Those are evidence for people that kept moving from one point to another. And we have other examples. For example, we know that some Spanish Jewish families that were traders, they had houses also in Morocco, and they spent half a year here, half a year there. So the communities were definitely very close. And there are also so many surnames that are shared because of the shared culture. The Arabic was the language of Spanish Jews before Judeo-Spanish became prominent. Arabic was the main language for Spanish Jews, at least in the Islamic territories. And so many names are shared that are based on the Arabic language, and we don't know to say whether those sharing is just like the families are related, and if they are related, which one brought it where? Like it's a family from Morocco that moved to Spain, or it's a family from Spain that moved to Morocco. But for sure, we know the communities were very closely related. And this is the maps you see here show main places Jews lived in the 14th and 15th century in Spain, various parts of Spain, in North Africa. And you can see many communities showing the Jewish presence in both places was very, very strong. And the 14th and 15th centuries were unfortunately characterized by, again, religion intolerance, and Jews in both Morocco and Spain were persecuted. For example, we know that in 1391, there were mass pogroms in Spain that caused many families to flee Spain to other places. Amongst the locations they migrated to was also Algeria and Morocco. But we know that during the 15th century, Fez had several pogroms that encouraged Jews also to move to Spain. So again, a religious intolerance in both sides of the Gibraltar Strait. This time, like in Spain, it was from Christians, and in Morocco, it was from Muslims, but unfortunate circumstances. And another an interesting story, we all know about the Jews in Spain we all heard about them, that they were persecuted, and they were forced to convert to Christianity, some by force, some by will, and the Inquisition, and the whole story, we know about it. But very few people know that in Morocco there was something very similar to the story that we find in Spain. And the Jews of Fez in particularly, there were several mass conversions to Islam at several periods. The most important one in 1438, the early 15th century. And the reason to conversions were very similar to the reason in Spain, to avoid persecutions, partially forced conversions. For example, if a pogrom happened and the family wanted to be saved from being slaughtered, so they converted to Islam in Morocco or to Christianity in Spain. And also economic factors. For example, the creation of the Melach also meant Jews were moved to ghettos, and some Jews didn't want to be moved to the ghetto because it affected them financially. They wanted to be close to the market, so they decided to convert. And why is that story interesting? Because that community of converts that were formed in Fez, it remained endogenous until the last century or two. So meaning that they only kept marrying within themselves. And we see some of the examples of the surname. And they became, when you look at the most prominent figures in Morocco, many of them come from that community of ultimately Jewish, like we call them new Muslims of Jewish origins. That's how they were traditionally called in the literature. And many merchants and scholars and even religious figures come from this background. And when we started working with genetics, we saw that those people are it's variable, but they're heavily Jewish to this day. For example, you can see comparing results of two people that share the results with me. One is estimated by the algorithm of the company to be 75% Jewish, and the other one 95% Jewish. So they're really Jewish, and that's because they kept intermarrying. And I just put here two examples of prominent people. This one, some of you may recognize, the one on the left, Lala Salma Benani. She was the Moroccan princess and the former wife of the Moroccan king. And she comes from this origin of ultimately Jewish family 500 years ago. And the one on the right is Othman Ben Jelloun, which is a Moroccan billionaire, and he is one of the founders of the Bank of Africa. So really important group in Morocco, and their roots are largely Jewish. 1492, a year every Jew know about. Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal. Actually, not yet in Portugal, but Jews were expelled from most of Spain. And we can see here, this is a map taken from the book by Chaim Beinart, The Expulsion of Jews from Spain. And he describes here the migrational routes taken by different groups of Jews. And we can see Jews from the northeastern part mainly migrated via the eastern ports of Spain. They migrated east to Italy and to the Ottoman Empire, settled in Greece and Turkey, in those regions. Jews from southern Spain often went to North Africa, especially to Morocco and close parts of Algeria. And Jews from a large part of Castile, they're usually migrated to Portugal. In Portugal, there was no really expulsion. There should have been expulsion in 1497, but instead it was replaced with mass conversion. But families still managed to flee from Portugal to various places, among them North Africa. So some Jews arrived to Morocco via Portugal. Now, when they arrived, there was no such thing as Morocco. It was not one country. Various parts of the coast, as you can see in yellow, were part of Portugal, actually. Portugal conquered those parts. And there were two main kingdoms, one in the north with the capital being Fez, and one in the south with the capital being Marrakesh. And we know Jews mainly arrived to the port of Arzila. And to the Jews that arrived from Spain to Morocco, they faced many difficulties, epidemics, violence from the Portuguese that were on the coast, violence from the Muslims that lived there. So it was really difficult for them. But many of them managed to reach their main destination at that time was the city of Fez, which was the capital and one of the largest, most important cities. But they also arrived to other places. We know of Jews that arrived to Tetuan, to Marrakesh, to Safi, to other ports, and there was also a stream that kept going throughout the century after of families of technically Marranos, families that originally converted to Christianity that kept arriving to Morocco. Some of them remained in Morocco, but some of them, especially the later part, like waves that arrived in the 17th century, they spent in Morocco short period of time, and then they went to other centers such as Amsterdam and the Sephardic community in Amsterdam and London. Another interesting thing concerns Morocco is that when Sephardic Jews arrived to Morocco, they sometimes decided to go back to Spain because it's so close, so they could afford it and convert to Christianity. This is one story also taken from the book of Beinart of the Jews of Maqueda, that they all went to Morocco via Portugal, and then they decided, at least some of them decided, that they want to go back to Spain, and they returned to their hometown after they all converted to Christianity. Now, it makes sense for 1492, but what I found, which was interesting, those conversions to Christianity lasted for over 150 years after the expulsion. Here we have a testimony of a Moroccan Jewish man of the Al-Mosnino family who was arrested in Goa. He traded in India and he was arrested in India. Now, Goa in India was a Portuguese territory, so he was taken to Lisbon to be trailed because they believed he is a crypto-Jew, returning to Judaism. And he had to testify. And in his testimony, he said that he remembers from Morocco the Camondo brother, Jacob Camondo and Salomon Camondo, who converted to Christianity, Abraham Gibran, Moisen Ben Zamero, also from Tangier, who converted to Christianity. And those people lived in the 17th century, so over 120 years after the expulsion. They are the great-grandsons of people who came from Spain, and they kept converting to Christianity and go back to Spain. So that's an interesting trend that obviously did not exist for Jews that arrived to the Ottoman Empire because it's so far, but for Morocco, it's close, so they could afford it. But of course, it's not that all Spanish Jews that arrived to Morocco returned to Spain. Only a minority did, and most of them settled in Morocco and remained there. So what are the traces that we find for Sephardim in Morocco? So the first and most obvious remnant is the Judeo-Spanish, is the language they brought. Now, many Jews from Spain also spoke Arabic. They were still bilingual, but at that point, by the 15th century, the first language for Jews in most of Spain was already, depending on the region, but Jews from that arrived to Morocco mainly arrived from Castile, and their language was Castilian, which is Spanish. And we know it was at first, for the first 200, 300 years, it was a very common language that was spoken in most big cities that had large portion of Jews that arrived from Spain. But by the 19th and 20th century, the language survived only in the northern part of Morocco, in the region of Tetuan. Tetuan was the most significant community in the area. And they are called the Hispanic Moroccan Jews, the Spanish-speaking Moroccan Jews. And they spoke a dialect called Haketia, which is considered to be the cousin of Ladino that was spoken in the Ottoman Empire. And the language, because it's so close, and this part of Morocco was actually controlled by Spain in the 20th century, the language went through a process of re-Spanization, and it became more like modern Spanish. So it's less archaic than Ladino. Beyond the language, it's not just the language, it's the whole culture. So Judeo-Spanish songs, life circle songs, romancero Sephardi. So a lot of studies were done. This northern Moroccan population retained all of those cultural aspects, all sorts of romances that go back to medieval Spain. And a lot of those studies were done by Susanna Weich-Shachat from the Hebrew University. She did a lot of those studies. Beyond language and culture, surnames, because Jews in Spain, as Stasha explained, Dr. Bader explained last lecture, Jews from Spain already had fixed surnames by the time of the expulsion, and we can use those surnames to trace. And there are hundreds of surnames in Morocco that we can trace back to Spain. Some of them are very common. I gave you just a sample. It's not all of them. Some of them are very common. For example, Biton, which was one of the most common surnames in Moroccan Jews in the 20th century. But beyond surnames, also given names. And those given names survived not only in the Spanish-speaking regions, but also in the regions that lost Spanish as a language, but they retained a lot of the given names, and many of those given names, especially female given names, because men usually had Hebrew names, but the females usually had sometimes had non-Hebrew names in higher portion. So they retained names like Luna, Rosa, Rika, Reina, Sol, Solika, a very common given name in Morocco, and few male given names such as Vidal, Leon. So those are remnants that even in Arabic-speaking areas we can find those names. It means that some families there used to speak Spanish before they lost their Arabic. Another aspect is the big dress, which I'm sure some of you heard about it. It's the wedding dress. Actually, not only in wedding, but women usually got those before their wedding from their father or husband. And various studies have been done about it, and it's widely believed that this dress originated in Spain and was brought to Morocco already from Spain. And in the trial of the Almosninos that I mentioned before, he mentions that one of the Camondo brothers purchased from the Almosnino family a dress like this, red with golden strips, that belonged to a member of the family, Oro, who died 20 years earlier. So we know this is really old tradition in the Sephardic community of Morocco to use this dress. Food, a lot of foods we find all over the Sephardic world, like the chamin, in Morocco sometimes called adafina, and the fazuelos of Purim, and of course religion. So most rabbinical dynasties in Morocco, if you look at them, the names and their origins, they came from Spain. So the Spanish Jews that came to Morocco, they became the most prominent religious figures in the country. Families like Toledano, like Aben Danan, Verdugo, Avensour, but also I didn't list here southern names like Pinto and Corcos. And they made legislations and takanot that were the traditions they had that they brought from Spain were slightly different than the traditions the local Jews in Morocco already had. And the last remnant of it we find is the ketubah, the nosach of the ketubah, the right of the ketubah. Now, the ketubah is a legal document, and there was difference in how the local tradition and the Sephardic tradition treated divorce, especially divorce and inheritance law. And for each ketubah in Morocco until the 20th century, this is the ketubah of my great-great-grandparents, it would still say if the tradition was Castilian or local. Now, many people use it to say, okay, so there was still separation in the 20th century. This family is local, this family is Sephardic. Actually, there was no such thing. The tradition on the ketubah does not correlate with the origins of the family. Here we can see a ketubah from Tangiers, and you can see here in small that they say that the Megorashim Castilla, follows the right of the ones expelled from Castile. And this one, you can see here, it says in bold that Toshavim, the residents, the local Jews. But when we look at the genealogy of this family, that Homogador, this ketubah that says that Toshavim, we see that at least the bride belongs to some of her ancestors were some of the most prominent Sephardic families in Morocco. Families like Ben Malka, like Mendez, Caro, De Avila, Sarfati, and many other families. So the tradition of the ketubah does not correlate with family. And in general, in Morocco, there was general homogeneity within communities. So within a community, there was no distinction between Toshavim and Megorashim until the 20th century. There was no such thing. It was lost in the first 200 years, I think. There was a distinction between Rumis and Forasteros, meaning the Spanish-speaking Jews and the Arabic-speaking Jews. And Rumis is the Spanish-speaking Jews and Forasteros is the Arabic-speaking Jews. They each called each other like that. So that distinction did exist, but even this doesn't correlate with the origins. You can have Spanish-speaking family from the north that ultimately is not Sephardic, and many of the Forasteros are Sephardic. So full merger, you can say, but there was still diversity of communities, and each community was somewhere on a spectrum in which traditions they followed and what language they spoke. So there was diversity. And this one is a quote that speaks to the diversity that the legislations the community of the expelled from Spain did in Fez. Most Morocco follows them, but Afilal doesn't follow them, and in Marrakesh only some families follow them. So there was homogeneity within communities typically, but not between communities. And now we're going to the last topic, which is the early diaspora. Gibraltar was a Spanish territory until 1730, and then it became a British territory. And by it becoming British, it means Jews could settle there, and the number of Jews grew rapidly. By 1780, Jews represented 25% of population. And if we look at where those Jews came from, over 90% of them came from Morocco, and the vast majority of those from one city, which is Tetuan in northern Morocco. And the main reasons for migrations were financial opportunities and persecutions in Morocco. And Gibraltar also served as a gate to Western Europe, mainly UK. Many of the families who initially arrived to Gibraltar later migrated to mainly the Sephardic community of London, but also to places like Livorno. And among examples of notable people from Gibraltar community, we have the Joshua Hassan, which was the chief minister of Gibraltar and the first mayor. We have families like here we see Leslie Belisha was his family came to England from Morocco, probably via Gibraltar, and he served as the Minister of Transport and the War Secretary during World War II in Britain. We have here artists like this one is Orovida Pissarro, and her mother is Esther Levi Ben Susan, and their families came from to London from Gibraltar and to Gibraltar from Morocco. Another place we see a lot of Jews migrating to from Morocco is Portugal, starting the 19th century. The story, some of the two most prominent families in Portugal were the Abecassis and the Ben Saud family. And the story of how they arrived to Portugal is pretty reflective. So they first settled in the Azores as part of trade business, and they were active in the transatlantic trade. But members of those families later established themselves in mainland Portugal in communities such as Faro and Lisbon. And for example, Alfredo Ben Saud, he was born in 1856 in the Azores. He was an engineer and a university professor, and he is the one to establish in Lisbon the Superior Technological Institute. It's like their MIT in Portugal, and he's the one to establish it. And his brother, one of his brothers was a famous historian, another brother was a famous gastroenterologist in France already. So those families were deeply integrated in the academia. And one example of how the Ben Saud was so prominent in Portugal, it's one of the richest families in Portugal to this day. They have business in the Azores, but one of the former prime ministers, one of the former president of Portugal, Jorge Sampaio, his grandmother was also from the Ben Saud family. So his maternal grandmother. So really prominent families. And there is an excellent genealogical study that was done by Jose Maria Abecassis. He wrote a series of 4-volume book called Genealogy Iberica about Jewish families in Gibraltar and Portugal, because the Jewish families that went to Gibraltar and the ones that went to Portugal are very overlapping. And he wrote the names and the genealogy of each one. And most names, if we just take a look at the shortest row here for the last volume, if you look at the names here, all of them, besides Wolfenson and Tedeschi, all of them came from North Africa, and all of them probably from Morocco, maybe Touati from Algeria, but the rest surely Morocco, Tangi, Tapiero, Tarregano, Taurel, very typical northern Moroccan, mainly northern Moroccan surnames. And we see here a photo of photos from Portugal or from Gibraltar of Jewish families at the time. So we can see they in clothing style and in many aspects, they adopted Western European traditions at the time of how they dress and everything. But if we look at the names, they preserved a lot of the Moroccan naming traditions. For example, this family from Portugal, the name of the mother is Maknin, which is an Arabic name, and she still called her son, who was born in Portugal, she still called him Mesod, which is again an Arabic name, very common in Moroccan Jews. And typical Judeo-Spanish names also, Orovida, which was only used by Moroccan Jews as much as I know, Clara, typical Sephardic name. So still they preserved some elements of their ancestors in Morocco. And the interesting thing, they adopted a tradition to have double surnames, both maternal and paternal surname. It's a very Iberian thing to do. And in Portugal, they follow the Portuguese tradition of maternal surname first and paternal second. And in Gibraltar, they follow the Spanish tradition of paternal surname first and maternal second. Which we see here, for example, Amzalek Buzaglo, so it's an example of dual surname. And this is an example of how the communities were very related. We see here on the left Ketubah of the Sekira and Laredo families from Gibraltar, and on the right Ketubah from Lisbon of the Sekira family, probably cousin marriage because they both have the same surname. And if we look at the small letters, we see that the tradition, the rite the Ketubah follows is the Sephardic rite from Morocco, the Castilian rite from Morocco. So again, they preserved the the Sephardic Moroccan traditions, because again, most families did come from Morocco, and especially the northern Morocco. Okay. Another interesting community is in Cape Verde. Jews arrived there also, and we have a partial list of families that settled in Cape Verde at the time. For example, Ben Uliel, Ben Shimol, Pinto, Seruya, Wachnun, Taregano, all of the families were from Morocco. And the descendants, they didn't survive as a Jewish community. They assimilated to the local population. They intermixed with the local Gentiles in Cape Verde, of Portuguese and of African descent, but still many Cape Verdeans bear Jewish surnames. For example, one of the most famous Cape Verdean, I think in soccer, his surname is Ben Shimon, a Jewish surname. So they still have many descendants there, even if they're not Jewish today. And another big community was in Brazil. So Jews started migrating to Brazil from Morocco in the 19th century, especially because of the rubber boom. At the time, rubber was worthy like gold. So many Jews who tried to get rich, they migrated to the Amazon, to places along the Amazon River, and many important communities in Belém and in Manaus. And it was usually single men that migrated there, but at some point it was families. And again, there was a very big intermixing with the local population, with the Native American population in Brazil. It is estimated that there are 250,000 descendants of Amazonian Jews that are not Jews anymore, that they are they now Christians. But there is still descendants that are Jews. They didn't all mixed out. And we see, for example, in Belém, they had two Jewish synagogues, one Sha'ar HaShamayim and one Eshel Abraham. And we ask ourselves, why Jews in one city, not very large community, why did they need two synagogues? And if you look it up online, it will tell you that the synagogue on the left belongs to the Megorashim and the synagogue on the right belongs to the Toshavim. Again, there was no such distinction in the 19th century. People are mixing the terms. The synagogue on the left belonged to Jews that spoke Spanish, and they had their prayers in a more Judeo-Spanish way, and the synagogue on the right belonged to the Jews that spoke Arabic, but those can be the same families, just that came from different regions. It's again the point of, in Morocco there was no distinction between Toshavim and Megorashim, only by proxy, by what language you speak, but it's not reflective of origins with high correlation. Some notable Amazonian Jews that I found Googling online. So for example, Yitzhak Benayoun Saba, he was a very important Brazilian entrepreneur. Sarah Barchilon Ben Uliel, she was the first pediatrician in Portugal. She was born in Brazil to a Jewish family. They moved to Portugal. She was the first pediatrician in Portugal. She was also a feminist activist, and she supported Jewish refugees in Portugal during World War II. It reminds me of another figure that Helen Casas Benatar, also a Moroccan Jew in Morocco, that supported Jewish refugees in Morocco during the World War II. We have here Samuel Ben Shimol, who is he was historian and economist, and he had several businesses. Ben Shimon, very rich family in Brazil. And a more recent individual, Eduardo Pazuello. I'm not sure he's fully Jewish, but he is a politician in Brazil. But his paternal grandfather, Pazuello is a Moroccan Jewish surname, his paternal grandfather he was born in Brazil to Moroccan Jewish parents. And the last diaspora for today, the land of Israel. So not many people know it, but Moroccan Jews were some of the largest group in the land of Israel before what's called now historically first Aliyah, but it was not really the first Aliyah. This is the first Aliyah. So we have this person, Rabbi Yehuda Leon Bivas. He was born in Gibraltar in 1780 to Jewish family that originally again from Tetuan, as we said, Gibraltar and Tetuan very related. And he was also a doctor, not just a rabbi. He got his doctoral degree from a university in England. He was the head of a yeshiva in Gibraltar, and he had a national awakening. He was like, Jews have to stop wandering from city to city. You said the Jewish people are lacking rest. We are being pushed away from country to country, from city to city. We have to go back to the land of Israel. We have to establish a country. He was one of the first Zionists, if you think about it. And he went to a journey across North Africa and across the Balkans, and he spoke to many Jews and tried to convince them to make Aliyah. And indeed, many Jews followed him. And we see that in the years after, thousands of Jews from North Africa and from the Balkans settled in the land of Israel. And among the most prominent figures in the Old Yishuv at the time, we find people like Abraham Oyar, Rabbi Aaron Shlosh, Chaim Amzaleh, all of which their families came from Morocco. Or Chaim Amzaleh's family came from Gibraltar, but originally Morocco. And they were very influential at the time. For example, Abraham Oyal, he was the Minister of Finances. He was the Jewish representative. He was the representative for Rothschild, Lovers of Science, AIU, Alliance Universelle. He helped establishing some of the first moshavot in Israel, Petach Tikva, Ekron, Gedera, Yesod HaMa'ala. He died very early, died prematurely at age 35, and his death was considered a significant loss to the Old Yishuv. His brother Yosef Bey Moyal, the Bey is like a Turkish title given to important people. He served as the vice consul of Spain and Persia, and he purchased many lands in Tel Aviv area. And his brother was the main establisher of the clock tower in Jaffa. For those of you who have been in Jaffa, they know for sure the clock tower, and it was established by the brother of Abraham Oyal. Rabbi Aaron Shlush and his father, Rabbi Avraham, they came to Israel, and they were amongst the first people to build some of the first neighborhoods outside of the walls of Jaffa, and they helped Jewish migrants to accommodate in the land of Israel. It's not yet the country of Israel. And Chaim Amzaleh was born in Gibraltar, and he was also a prominent person in Jaffa. So, and if we look at the Montefiore census at the time, we see that thousands of people. Montefiore, for those of you who don't know, Montefiore had a census of people who lived in the land of Israel during various parts of the 19th century. And you can see the years, 1839, so more than 100 years before Israel as a country was established. And we see at least thousands of people who were originally born in various places of Morocco, for example, Fez, Marrakesh, or Algeria, that they came to the land of Israel. And we know that those groups were the majority of Jews in the northern area, in Tiberias, in Safed, and a very large minority in other places, for example, in Jerusalem. So their number and influence on the Old Yishuv was really huge. And there is another important person called Rabbi David ben Shimon. He also came from North Africa, and when he saw that the Jews from North Africa in the land of Israel, many of them were poor, and he saw that they were being mistreated by the older Sephardic groups that lived, the Ladino-speaking Jews that lived in Jerusalem at the time. And he was like, it's not fair, because most money that the Jews in the land of Israel received, or at least a large portion, came from donations and collecting money, people who collected money in North Africa. So he decided that the Jews from North Africa in the land of Israel should split off the Sephardic communities. The Sephardic communities at the time, all Jews of non-Ashkenazi origins belonged to, so even ones from the Caucasus and Persia and Iraq. And he decided Jews from North Africa should split. And he established the Maghrebi congregations, and he collected donations. He went and collected donations in North Africa to support those independent congregations of North African Jews. And they are the first people who built the first Jewish neighborhood outside of Jerusalem old city walls. So you can see two streets in Jerusalem are named after him. One street named after the person, Rabbi David ben Shimon, and another street called Rehov HaMa'aravi'im. Ma'aravi means someone from the west, and that was the typical nickname Moroccan Jews had because they lived in the westernmost country in the old world. And it says here in the small written, named after the migrants from North Africa who built the first neighborhood outside of the walls. So not only in Jaffa, also in Jerusalem. So they were really important in the Old Yishuv. It's a story not so many people know about. In Israeli schools, no one learns about it. Modern diaspora, I'm not going to talk about it, just in a few words. Most live in Israel, but large communities in France and Canada, in Spain and Latin America, especially from northern Morocco, against the Jews that preserved the Spanish language. Many of them, for language reasons, migrated to Spain and Portugal, and also Latin America, and many from Venezuela, because it's very unstable there. Many of them moved to the USA, especially to Florida. And as Jews, one of the things we like to do the most is showing off our Nobel laureates. So Moroccan Jews also have some Nobel laureates. Serge Harouche, he was born in Casablanca. He was awarded the Nobel laureate in physics. Baruch Ben Aslaf was born in Venezuela to Jewish parents from Morocco and Algeria, but the Algerian side is also originally Moroccan. And he was awarded in medicine. He was an immunologist. And the most recent one is Turing Award, because it's the Nobel equivalent for computer science, because there is no Nobel Award in computer science. Dr. Yeshua Bengio, he was born in France to parents from Tangiers, and he later moved to Canada. And that's the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'll try to look.
Thank you so much, Dolev. That was amazing. A really good overview of the history of Moroccan Jewry. If you all have any questions, like Dolev said, please enter them into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we have left. One question here: any reverse migration trends back to Morocco or through the Iberian Peninsula?
Yes, those communities remained closed. I assume this question refers to the later waves of migration. So yes, some Jews from the Amazon, some of them later returned to Morocco. We know of some examples. For example, from the top of my head, there is a family from Tetuan called Tobelen. A branch of them moved to Brazil. They adopted the surname Moreno in Brazil, and then they returned to Morocco. And all Moroccan Morenos you see nowadays, there are quite a few in Israel, they are originally the Tobelen who moved to Brazil and returned to Morocco.
Where would you advise someone who wants to research the Moroccan Jewish or Sephardic heritage to go and research it?
So for Morocco, it's an issue. A lot of like there are no good documentations. I would start in Facebook groups, trying to look for people with the same surname from same regions. Try to look for sources that are relevant to the community of origin. For example, if your family is from Fez, so try to look for sources that are relevant for Fez. If your family is from Tetuan, I think Tetuan may be the best part that has documentation, the old Spanish area. Try to look for sources for that area. For the villages, it's even harder. But it's possible. I would start consulting maybe genealogists, maybe in the groups.
Why is it often seem that a lot of this is just a question? I don't know if it's too controversial. Why does it seem often that a lot of amateur genealogists actually tend to have more information, or actually tend to have more accurate content than professional genealogists a lot of the time, particularly a lot of large agencies?
It's a good question. I think it's a function of how passionate you are about what you do and what you study, and then sometimes the non-professional ones try to prove themselves, so they really dig up every corner they can find. I see a question in the chat. Were there Jewish converts after the 9th century, or there were Jews, Berber Jews from antiquity? So the answer is all information we have about mass conversions of Berbers is comes from mainly from legends that were written sometimes 1,000 years after the alleged event. So we have no factual information about conversions of Berbers, definitely not post-Islamic, but not pre-Islamic. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we don't know if there is, at least in Morocco, we don't know if there is any continuity from pre-Islamic period. The fact that there were some Jews before doesn't mean they are the ancestors of the Jews after. And because I also deal with genetics, I can tell you we have no evidence of mass conversions. Jews everywhere absorb some of the local genetics, but it's usually not in significant amount. And we have no evidence for mass conversion of Berber tribes. We have no such information. And follow-up question, Tawaj ancestry, did it migrate from Al-Andalus? Maybe some families did, but again, everywhere in Morocco, it's a mix of families that some came from Spain and some were there before. Some of the parts that were there before also came from Spain and some didn't. It's everywhere. Jews are really the wandering people everywhere. Jewish families. In every important community, Jewish families came from all parts of neighboring areas. The question about DNA. DNA is surprisingly Italian. DNA, the reason I think Leo will talk about it in the next lecture, so maybe I'll leave it to him. I'll just say all Western Jews are Jews from North Africa and whole Mediterranean, really. If you take, so including the Ottoman Jews, if you take a DNA test, you will find that the majority, like a large amount, 20, 30% is Italian. Maybe sometimes, depends on the company, you can even reach 40, 50, because Western Jews are similar genetically to Italian. It doesn't mean you necessarily have recent Italian ancestors. So for Moroccan Jews, you can take a DNA test and find out you're 30% Italian, but I have no information about any families from Italy that moved to Morocco. So it's not recent. It goes back to the Roman period, to our ancestors in the Roman period, and it's doesn't mean it's recent. Berber genetics cannot be ignored, no matter. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying that, for example, for paternal lines, the typical Berber haplogroup for the paternal line is called EM81. Well, there are also EV65, EL19 that isn't M81, but if you take all of those combined in Moroccan Jews and ask what portion of Moroccan Jews have such typical Berber haplogroups, it's like 5%. So maybe it cannot be ignored, but it's not the main story. Share my email for follow-up questions. You can try to ask now. Maybe I don't know how much time I'll have to answer questions by email because I'm a very busy student. But I think if you can ask now, it's the best.
Are there any research institutions people with Moroccan heritage can go to discover more or just do some research on their heritage or their history?
So I think the best tool for me was a genealogy sites, MyHeritage, Jenny, Genanet, all of those websites, and Facebook groups. You would be surprised how many Facebook groups there are and how useful those are. For sometimes you can find people who have more information, people who remember. I don't think any official institute or museum would have more information than a Facebook group can afford on specific family's genealogy.
Okay, I think that's all the questions.
Mitochondrial DNA. Also, Same answer. Most mtDNAs. This lecture isn't about genetics, but most mitochondrial DNA found in Moroccan Jews and North African Jews in general does not seem to trace to Berber, to ones that are common in Berbers. For example, not even ones that are not of sub-Saharan origins. I think it's single digit. Most people who study Jewish uniparentals will agree with me. It's single digit haplogroups that clearly correlate with Berber ancestry from both paternal and maternal sides. It's not the main part of the story. It's not a main part of the story even. Um, and I think Leo will talk. Leo has the next lecture, and he will speak about genetic. So I think he might expand on that if there is
Absolutely.
interest.
All right, I think with that, I want to thank Dolev so much for having this wonderful presentation. Really, it was fantastic. And for those of you who, if you missed any part of it or want to rewatch it, you can go to youtube.com/Sephardic Brotherhood. Please join us next week for our third and final part in this three-part series with Leo Cooper, who's here today. We're going to have him next week talking about Sephardic genetics and genomes. So it should be a fascinating discussion as well. Again, if you've missed any of the past courses, you missed last week's or missed parts of this week, you can always go to youtube.com/Sephardic Brotherhood or sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. Dolev, again, thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you all for joining us today.